All right, welcome to the second lecture in our series on agriculture, and the slides again by a gentleman named David Palmer, and I am Miss Gall, your host for the afternoon. So we're going to talk about agricultural revolutions. We're going to talk about three different ones, and they're going to be quite a distance apart in terms of time, at least between the first and the second, but as with population, it's because it takes time for these things to take effect and to really cause the kind of growth that then generates or forces that long-term change. So our first agricultural revolution has to do with the invention of farming as an idea and the domestication of livestock. And depending on where we're talking about, really we're talking about anywhere from 8 to 14,000 years ago. And it diffuses from several source regions. So it's got several hearths, okay, and then it spreads outwards from there. You might remember this from your world history classes because it's that shift from the hunter-gatherer societies to the agricultural societies. Okay, so hopefully you learned a little bit about that. And there's really any number of probable hearths of agriculture. The ones that are best known are Mesoamerica, so you can see kind of South Mexico. That's where the Maya were, right? And then you've got the Andean Peninsula, and that's the Inca. You've got West Africa. That's, I believe, in the Timbuktu region. I could be wrong about that, so don't quote me. The Nile River, that's definitely going to be Egypt. And Egypt was a hugely important agricultural region. Then we've got Mesopotamia. I know it doesn't seem like it today because it's mostly all desert, but really it's mostly all desert there because it was overused and abused. And so the result was an ecosystem that collapsed in on itself. We've also got the Indus River Valley, which is modern-day India, Pakistan, and that area, and also the Ganges Delta, also modern India, and into some of the smaller countries there. And then probably one of the more influential ones really is also East China. And it is, you do need to know where those hearths of agriculture were. Okay, so fast forward a little bit in time, and well, not really a little bit, a lot of it. And if this wasn't on your flashcard list, make a flashcard. I'm pretty sure it was on the list, but just in case it wasn't, know what the Columbian Exchange was. And the Columbian Exchange is the exchange of mostly plants and animals between continents following the voyages of Christopher Columbus in the late 15th century. So you know the old rhyme, in 1492 Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue, right? And what happens is that we see this amazing back and forth, this diffusion of agricultural products and animals from not just from Europe to the Americas, but also from a lot of products that we associate with Europe actually get their start in the Americas. Okay, so things like potatoes, if you're at all familiar with the Irish diet, right, you know potatoes play a huge part and have played a huge part historically. What would Italian food be without tomatoes? Tomatoes actually got their start here in the United States, or not in the United States, sorry, here in the New World. Peanuts are another one. Tobacco. I mean, tobacco's been hugely important in history. And there are a lot more products that are on this list, by the way. These are just some of the bigger ones. Then going the other way, so we were talking New World to Old, now going the other way, Old World to New, we look at wheat, and we think about what the history of the United States would be if we didn't have wheat farms, right? Rice, the U.S. actually is a fairly large producer of rice when we look at, say, down by the Carolinas and things like that. Coffee. I know we tend to think of coffee as coming from South America, but the truth is it's an import to South America. Apples, I was just reading something the other day talk about how apples came over from the old world to the new and really took to the east coast of the United States in a way that they did not take in Europe. And so they become hugely important in U.S. history. We've also got, you know, cattle, chickens, right? I know cattle's on there twice, but you'll deal with that. So fast forward a little bit more, and now we're at our second agricultural revolution. Okay, and we see technological changes starting in about the 1600s in Western Europe. By the 1800s, it spreads to North America. So it starts out with some pretty basic ideas, what we think of as being pretty straightforward, okay? Crop rotation, which is to say that instead of planting one crop all the time in a single field, what you do is maybe one year you plant a field with potatoes, and then the next year it gets planted with clover, and then the year after that it gets planted with wheat, so that you're rotating through what's on that land to help refurbish the earth and replenish it. And you also see, so that's not really a technology so much as that's an idea, but you also see technology in the shape of things like better horse collars, which then enable horses to pull harder loads, which enables more marginal lands to start to come into play and start to be agriculturally useful. Eventually, as we go, we see increasingly the replacement of human labor with machines. So it's the second agricultural revolution, for instance, where the tractor gets developed. And also to supplement natural fertilizers, read mostly poop, and pesticides with chemical fertilizers and pesticides. Okay, so the second agricultural revolution is the beginnings of commercialization, which is to say producing products for trade. Okay, and it enables widespread urbanization. So it leads to another spread of cities in much the same way the first agricultural revolution leads to the development of cities. This actually leads to many of the huge cities that we know and love today. And this is the shift, as one of my former students put it, where we're really going to machines and mechanization. Okay. Our third agricultural revolution, and this is where we're going to spend the bulk of our time, this happened starting in about the 1960s, and it's also called the Green Revolution. And this is where we start to see hybridized grains with an emphasis on better yields. Okay, so more crops per acre. Okay, we see a greater reliance on synthetic fertilizers because those larger crops need more food, and that's what fertilizer is. And we also see genetic engineering of crops. So in other words, what we see is plants being managed at that genetic level, genes substituted in. We see varieties crossbred to increase desirable traits. So it might be size, it might be the ability to flourish in rain or in dry, and things like that. And with that, we start to see what's called vertical integration of ownership. In other words, there are a handful of big companies when we talk about agriculture these days, and they own, vertical integration means you own the entire supply chain. So you go from top to bottom as much as you can. You control everything from the chemical inputs to the manufacturing process to the distribution process and the marketing process. And then, if humanly possible, you would also, since we're talking about agriculture, own the farms and the output. With the third agricultural revolution, we've also seen a rapid increase in the globalization of production, which has led to some pretty fast increases in technology and the like, and new and creative uses for, transportation is what I meant. New and creative uses for transportation, for instance, to move crops around the world. So to give you just some idea, we talk about vertical integration and what that means for us. On the slide here, you'll notice there's a table that lists, it's a partial list of some of the brands that are owned by ConAgra, which is one of the major companies. And they really cover everything from frozen food, right, Banquet, or Healthy Choice, to hot chocolate, Swiss Miss, Marie Callender's, which we tend to think of as a restaurant chain, okay, or Hebrew National hot dogs, and the like. So you can really see what I was saying about it being really kind of a anything and everything, and how that might affect what we get on our plates. So a little bit more about the Green Revolution. The focus is on high impact foods, so foods that are consumed by lots and lots of people. Mostly its impact has been felt in Latin America and in Asia. Pardon me there. So for instance, if we want to talk about rice, and there's a picture of a rice plant here on the slide, rice is a staple food for 2.5 billion Asian people, give or take today. It provides roughly 2/3 of the calories for Asians who have rice-based diets. Okay, the Green Revolution raised the yields. It improved the rice strains, meaning it made them hardier and more likely to survive. Okay, and also where they would give more grains per plant. Okay, there's a significantly greater use of fertilizer. So in other words, again, those plants require more and more food. An increased use of irrigation. And if you don't know what fertilizer are, if you don't know what irrigation is, these are things that should, by the way, wind up on your flashcards because they are terms you're going to need to know. And irrigation is just when you bring water to the plant. So every time you water your lawn, for example, that's irrigation. Okay. And Asia's rice production grew at annual rates of about 3% until 1980. And so what growing at an annual rate of 3% means if you start year 1 at 100%, year 2 it's 103%, year 3 it's 3% of 103%, okay, and on up the way. So 3% doesn't sound like much, but it spirals upwards and it grows increasingly quickly. Okay, and the yield growth rate has actually exceeded the high population growth rates of the time, and as you've seen, those population rates are stabilizing, so there actually is enough food in Asia to feed everybody there. We could talk about countries that are now self-sufficient in or even rice exporters. Okay, these are countries, by the way, that used to either import food or in bad years where people just died off. So for instance, Thailand or Vietnam. Poor people have benefited as yield increases caused real prices to drop. When we say real prices, what we mean is that we factor in things like inflation to account for changes in price. So even though it may, if you looked at it, it may look like it costs more, the reality is if we factor it in inflation, it's actually costing less. So that means people are able to eat more. Okay. Some of the problems though, because this is not all good, is that as success has led to less concern about food security, that has dropped, there's less urgency to invest in irrigation and agricultural research and rural infrastructure. Okay, the growth rate in rice production actually declined between 85 and 95 due to drop in the rate of rice yields. As areas have become more and more tired, they require more and more fertilizers. And even with that, those increased yields become harder and harder to achieve and more costly. And actually one of the big debates right now in India is that these inputs cost money. And so if a farmer has a bad year, if he gets behind for some reason in his payments, it's actually leading to a spate of suicides and a discussion about whether or not we want to continue with these green revolution techniques because they are causing some broader problems. And our last slide here talking about some of the benefits. So it's reduced uncertainty. Okay, what that means is that crops that are planted are more likely to be able to be harvested. There's been a greater global exchange of agricultural products, which means that overall people are eating a wider variety of food. There have been increased crop yields, so there is more food to go around. Some of the costs, though, there's an increased dependence on fossil fuels. So most of those fertilizers, for instance, are based in fossil fuels. There's an increased reliance on chemical inputs, which again are costly and can harm the environment in ways that we're only just beginning to understand. There's less global diversity as farmers are encouraged to pursue only certain types, and there's less localized diversity of products as ones that are specifically adapted to the local environment are being dropped in favor of these green revolution products. There's also a dramatic increase in the concentration of pollutants in areas where it wasn't previously a problem because we weren't using these chemicals to grow the crops. So that's our slideshow on agricultural revolutions. It does give you just a little bit of background. You can find some more in your book and do a little bit more research online, but if you have questions, please by all means feel free to come see me and discuss them at our next class session, and I will see you then.